Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Super Wednesdays here in the Holy Apple on the 8th day of the first month of Adar 5779. Just want to start out giving a big thanks to our cameraman and do it all, Ephraim. It was really close. I got a call last night that the class was going to be canceled, and then this morning I got a call that Ephraim is around. When Ephraim is around, we'll travel, and his merit is this class. Today, the subject of our class is a subject that I have to tell you the story before I tell you the title. Many years ago, there was a family that moved from New York to Elon More. Now this was a historical event because up until that time there were never any American families that moved directly from the States to Elon More. Sometimes in more American settlements that are closer to Jerusalem, like Gush Etzion, Alon Shvut, you'll find the Americans do come straight, but it's a whole different ballgame. Elon More, way out, we're an hour and 20 minutes away from any city center, so it's not an easy jump to make. Anyways, the first family to come from the States, one of the first things when I met them, first things they told me was that many of their friends from New York told them that they were making the same mistake as the tribe of Ephraim who left Egypt before the redemption time. So this family, they asked me what I thought about that comment. Whoa, is that your bon voyage? Here, leave. You're about to fall the same way that the tribe of Ephraim fell. So I thought, wow, it's a very interesting question. And once or twice I gave a mini class on the subject many years ago. Many people have asked me to do a class on the subject. When I'm saying years ago, this was before the YouTube days, before the computer days. So whoever was there at the class heard it. Whoever was there did not hear it. But once again, what we have today with God's help is really months and months of work that Hashem allowed me to do here on the subject. And let's put it this way. I hope to have two versions of this class. Today will be a more reader or listener friendly version. I'm going to try to really condense it and make it listener friendly. I'm not going to get into a lot of the sources. I might say where the sources are, but unlike what I usually do is I go into them. Today I'm going to try to, as much as possible, when I really don't need to, I'm going to stay away from that. And I hope in one, maximum two classes, we could finish from the beginning to the end, very organized class on the whole subject. Because this is something that is very relevant to today. There are certain groups of Jews, I'm talking about religious Jews, that this is a very, very heavy point when they look at the state of Israel, when they look at what's going on now in the land of Israel. In the back of their minds, they're always thinking about the sin of the tribe of Ephraim that left Egypt too early and they were destroyed. So this is very relevant. This is even a Jewish law issue. It's not an idea only. It's also Jewish law. Is there a comparison to the state of Israel with the tribe of Ephraim? No comparison. Perhaps some comparison. So put on a few seat belts, and this is going to be the condensed version of the subject. I hope with God's help. I have so much more material that is very, very important, but those are going to be for the more scholarly and the people that have more time and energy and strength. For those people, it's definitely worthwhile because there's so much out on there, and there are very, very important ideas which I'm not bringing up today, which will be brought in the lengthened version of this class. So it's good sometimes to have two versions. Short for most people today. I always like to tell the story. In the summer, somebody sent me an article how there was a petition going around asking the NBA to, if they could condense the games a little bit, because I guess in basketball it's 12 times 4 quarters, 12 minutes each. So that's 48 minutes to try to concentrate. I guess today in our times, it's a lot of time to ask people to concentrate. People are used to going from program to program, to dial, to station to station. So anyways, always cracks me up. Try to, when I went to a game, I would come an hour, 2 hours before and stay an hour after. That was like an experience. I guess today we want the shortened version, the fast food version of it. Okay. So, here we go. Get your pens out, pencils, crayons, spray paint, whatever you want. Take it down. Okay. Sources that we are going to be using today are the following. When you're dealing with the subject of Ephraim's exiting the land of Egypt, here are the sources that we must jot down. Number one, we have the ceremony called Brit Ben Abitarim. Abraham was 70 years old, and in the area today, it's between the Hermon and Lebanon. In fact, every year there are a group of dozens and dozens of Jews that are given special army permission, and there's a place that's near Lebanon that the Arabs, the Arabic name for this place is the translation of Abraham's covenant that he made with God, which is very interesting. So this is in Genesis 15:13. Number two, the beginning of the portion of Bishalach. That's chapter 13, verse 17. Third source, Tehillim 78:9. Fourth source, the book of Chronicles, book number 1, chapter 7, verse 21. Shmot Rabbah, chapter 20, paragraph 11. Talmud, Sanhedrin 92, side B. Now, if you come up today, people that are religious, some kind of learning background, and you ask them, hey buddy, or hey gal, can you tell me what you know as far as the tribe of Ephraim, which of course is Joseph's son, leaving the land of Egypt early? Can you tell us something? Most people will, of course, then not be able to tell you what you're going to hear, of course, today, which is the whole story here, the whole base, the whole foundation. I'm going to take it from a lot of angles here and summarize it all. Most people will be able to answer the following. They know something that the tribe of Ephraim, they left Egypt before the redemption process and they were killed on their way out. That's what most people know. This, by the way, is a very, very mysterious part of the Torah. Even scholars know little about. Which means if you're out there in YouTube land, you're listening right now, you are a few steps above and beyond most Torah scholars. So that is good. So also make sure to get this out. To get this out, like all the classes here, it's very important to pass on the word, pass on the classes, to get it out as much as possible. The important part here is the message, to get it out. And you people are important here. You are the messengers here. So everyone could do their part and get it out, because we don't have the resources. In the meantime, give us a blessing, maybe we will. So you are an important persons here. Okay. Question number 1. When did this event occur? Now, for this, we have 4 opinions in the Torah. There are 4 opinions when this event took place. Number 1, 30 years before the redemption of the Jewish people, this event occurred. Which means the Jewish people were in Egypt, according to most opinion, 210 years. This happened 180 years after Jacob and his children came down to Egypt. This is according to the opinion of many. This is just mentioned 2, Seder Olam and Rashi. Second opinion is this event occurred 116 years before the redemption of the Jewish people from Egypt. Amazing. Now, this is according to the explanation of the commentary of the Radal, Rabbi David Luria, in the book called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, chapter 48. He explains the words, the source, and he explains it that this occurred 116 years before. Third opinion is that the event occurred twice. Amazing. There was 116 years before the Exodus from Egypt. There was a group from the tribe of Ephraim that left 116 years before the redemption. That means that the tribe of Ephraim were approximately 100 years in Egypt, and then they took off, 94 to be exact. And then, once again, another group from the same tribe left one more time, take 2 as they say in Hollywood. They left 30 years before the redemption from Egypt. So we take the 2 opinions and bring them together. This is the opinion that this event happened twice. Amazing. This is according to the Magen Avraham and the commentator Magen Avraham and the commentator Maharzu on the book Shir HaShirim Rabbah, chapter 2, paragraph 7. This is how they explain that this happened twice to the tribe of Ephraim. Last opinion, fourth opinion, this occurred when the Jewish people had already left Egypt and were in the desert wandering around for 40 years. When exactly? Does not say. But this opinion is based on the verse of Chronicles, book number 1, chapter 7, verse 21, as explained by the commentator, the Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi. So those are our 4 opinions. When did this event occur? Next question. Who killed the tribe of Ephraim? Okay, so either they left Egypt once, twice, or they were in the desert and then they left the Jewish people in order to try to come to the land of Israel. They left the Jewish people wandering in the desert. They were probably wondering where the Jewish people were. pun intended. So who killed them? According to most opinion, the Philistines, the Plishtim, killed the tribe of Ephraim. If you look up our sources that we mentioned in the beginning, our major 6 sources, you could find this in many of them. So this is according to the majority of opinion, but there is an opinion, an amazing opinion, by Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, the book, chapter 48. It says straight out, black and white, it says straight out that the Egyptians killed the tribe of Ephraim, who were either trying to escape from Egypt, or they were in the desert and they tried to escape from the Jewish people and enter into the land of Israel. So this is an interesting, most people don't know this, but there is an opinion that the Egyptians were the ones that killed them. How many Ephraim members were wiped out? Now we have here 5 opinions. How many, according to various sources? The most modest estimation is 3,000. Second opinion is 8,000. This is the Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, on the Chronicles, Book 1, Chapter 7, 21, verse 21. He comments, he says something very interesting. If you take a look at the count of the Jewish people when they first entered the desert, and if you look at the count when they entered the land of Israel, which means a span of 39 years, you will find that there are missing 8,000 members of the tribe of Ephraim. So he says that there were 8,000 members of the tribe of Ephraim that were wiped out when they tried leaving the Jewish people in the desert to try to enter the land of Israel before its time. Third opinion is according to a book called Midrash Agadah, 30,000 members of the tribe of Ephraim were wiped out. Fourth opinion, this is according to the book Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, chapter 48. It's also in Yonatan ben Uziel, in our source from the Chronicles. Both of them bring down the opinion that there were 200,000 members of the tribe of Ephraim that were murdered. Last but not least, believe it or not, in the source Shmot Rabbah 20, chapter 20, paragraph 11, according to this opinion of our sages, 300,000 were wiped out. 300,000 were wiped out. Okay, so far we know the different opinions. When did this event occur? We know the 2 opinions, who killed the tribe of Ephraim. Number 3, we know how many people, what kind of scale are we talking about of annihilation here of the tribe of Ephraim. Now we're going to get into, we're going to put the pedal to the metal here and ask the Grand Slam question here. Here's the question. What exactly was their sin? What exactly was the sin of the tribe of Ephraim? Now, if you ask people, most people don't know, and they're not familiar with this, but if you do meet some scholar, some lofty scholar, they'll probably tell you that they left the land of Egypt before its time, before redemption, and therefore they were killed. That's what most people would answer. So we're going to take that first answer, and we're going to put the question as follows. Basically, the answer to the question is that it should be a simple answer here. What was their sin? Why, of course, they had a transgression. They made a tremendous transgression. It was told to Abraham and passed down throughout the generations, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes and their children. It was passed down that during the covenant that God made with Abraham, where he informed him that his children would be enslaved, his children would be in a foreign land for 400 years, they jumped the gun. They left before 400 years was up. Very simple. Let's go home. Problem is, you got to hold your horses. Not simple at all. So put on those seatbelts. Let's give six answers why our answer of the fact that they left before the 400 years were up is problematic. There's 6 problems with this answer. Number 1, according to many opinions, I'll just name a few, the Ramban, Nachmanides, El Sheikh, the Shla, the Holy Shla, Abarvanel, they say that the 400-year count began at the time of this covenant. And therefore, if you do the math, the tribe of Ephraim, they left exactly at that mark. 400 years to the day that God made a covenant with Abraham. 400 years later, just like God had told Abraham that his children would be in a foreign land, slaved, the tribe of Ephraim got up, they packed their bags, and they left. Well, that's what God said. 400 years. They waited 400 years. So it's a difficult answer, that they left before the 400 years. They didn't leave before the 400 years. They left exactly. Okay. Now, basically, the problem here is, we know that the decree was 400 years. We just mentioned right now that if we take 400 years from the time of the covenant, then the tribe of Ephraim left exactly at the right time. However, our sages, our commentators, they bring down all types of possibilities. When do these 400 years kick in? When does it begin? And therefore, we'll see there's a problem with this answer. Okay, 400 years. But from when? So, according to many opinion, the 400 years we do not count from the covenant between Abraham and God. We count the 400 years from the birth of Isaac. Why is that? I will read here. There's one of our first sources that we said where it is, but we didn't read it. Now I'm going to read it because it's important here. And God said to Abram, "Know with certainty that your offspring shall be aliens in a land not their own, and they will serve them, and they will oppress them for 400 years." So, it says here that your descendants, your seed, your continuation. Well, at the time of the covenant between God and Abraham, Abraham was 70 years old and he did not have any children. It was only 30 years later, at the age of 100, ripe age of 100, did Abraham have his child Isaac. So, there are opinion that you have to count the 400 years. Everybody agrees with the 400 years. The problem is they disagree when the calculation shall begin. So this leaves a lot of leeway and doesn't really give us an answer. What was exactly the sin of Ephraim? Okay, so the second opinion is that we count 400 years from the time of the birth of Isaac. And therefore, when 400 years passed, the Jewish people left Egypt. And therefore, if you look in the portion in the book of Exodus, on the portion towards the end of the portion of Bo, you will see that it says that the Jewish people were 430 years in Egypt. Not 400, like the decree, 430. Where did that come from? Well, you take the 30 years between Abraham's covenant with God and the birth of Isaac, where it says, when you will have a descendant, when you have a child, the time will begin. That is explained by the sources, the following sources. Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer 48, and also the book Seder Olam. Third opinion, when to start the clock from the 400-year clock. When do we start it? The next opinion is we start it from when Jacob entered the land of Egypt with his family, right? 70 people went down to Egypt. Why is that? Because if the verse that we just read, it says they will be in a foreign land. So when Jacob came down to Egypt, he was in a foreign land. And this was going to be the land that they were going to be enslaved. So, according to the Ralbag, according to the commentator, the Ralbag, the 400-year clock begins to tick only from the time where Jacob enters the land of Egypt. Therefore, the Jewish people, not forget Ephraim, baby, but the Jewish people left 190 years before the time. Because when Jacob entered the land of Egypt, he was there. The descendants, not him, but the descendants were there for 210 years. We have to do 400, right? Do the math, 190. Fourth opinion, when does the clock begin? Okay, now we have the fourth opinion. It begins when the last tribe passes away. Who was the last tribe member to pass away? Of course, it was Levi. Levi lived the longest of all his brothers, the 12 tribes. Now, why do we start the clock from there? What happened then? Our sages tell us that when the last tribe passed away, when Levi passed away, the hard labor, the decrees against the Jewish people, not hard labor yet. Levi passes away 116 years before the Exodus from Egypt. And at this moment, at this time of history, the Egyptians began to relate to the Jewish people in a different way. Up until now, it was a very, very good relationship between the Jews and the Egyptians. Of course, realizing that who saved the day for the Egyptians was, of course, Joseph, the Jew. So they had a sense of gratitude towards the Jewish people. This ended when the last tribe member passed away. Any symbol of Joseph and his brothers who are part of the tribes, when the last symbol passes away, so it's much easier to now change our attitude towards the Jewish people. So, it wasn't hard labor and it wasn't slavery yet, but there were many new decrees, taxing of the Jewish people. They were beginning, the tide was changing. So, it says in the verse, by Abraham, in the covenant between him and God, that 400 years your children will be enslaved. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean slavery. It could mean that a person feels the noose tightening around their necks because of all these decrees, financial or whatever it might be, against the Jewish people. The fifth opinion is that we count the 400 years from the birth of Miriam, Moses and Aaron's sister. Now, Miriam was born 86 years before the Exodus from Egypt. And why was she named Miriam? Because in Hebrew, the name Miriam comes from the source of mar, which means bitter. Why was she called bitter? Because when she was born, there was a new level of decrees against the Jewish people. This was really the beginning of the hot water. This was the beginning of the becoming slaves and taken advantage of and killed and murdered and throwing the babies into the Nile with the crocodiles. Didn't know that one rhymed. So, it says in this verse in Genesis 15:13, it also uses the expression that the Jewish people will be oppressed. So oppression began. There's servitude and there's oppression. But the oppression began when Miriam was born. That's why she was called bitter, because really things became really, really bad. And this was the most difficult period of time. From 86 years until the end, it was very, very difficult for the Jewish people. This was the heavy-duty exile that they were experiencing. So, according to many opinion, the 400 years really begins from the birth of Miriam, which means that, once again, that the Jewish people, okay, Miriam was born 146 years after the arrival of Jacob. You're going to become good in math today, you know? She was born 146 years after Jacob's arrival, which means, okay, we do 400, which we have to do, minus, so from this point, 86 years, we have to count 400 years. So the Jewish people, according to this, they left Egypt 314 years early. Amazing. They left 314 years too early. The last but not least, this opinion can be found in the book Yalkut Shimoni, Exodus, paragraph 165. An amazing paragraph it is. It says that when Moses was born and thrown into the Nile, that is when the Egyptians began turning up the heat on the Jewish people to enslave us. This was really the turning point, which was when Moses was thrown into the Nile, which is an amazing thing. So how many years are there between Miriam and Moses? There are 6 years between them. So according to this opinion, the 400 years begin from the time that Moses was thrown into the Nile, which means we have 400 years to go after Moses' birth, which means we left Egypt after 80 years, and that means that we were 320 years we left too early. So folks, there you got it. Amazing. So we have 400. All opinion agree that that was the time. The problem is that there are many, many opinions. When does that 400 kick in? Number one, we'll go over it quickly now. Number one, we said it begins at the covenant between God and Abraham when Abraham was at the age of 70 up in Lebanon, in northern Israel. Number two, the 400 years begin to tick from the time that Isaac was born. Number three, the 400 years tick from the time that Jacob goes down to a land that is foreign to him, to Egypt. That's when the 400 years begin. And the fourth opinion, the 400 years begin when the last tribe, which was Levi, when he passes away, that's when you begin the 400 years. And the fifth opinion is we start the 400 years after the time where Miriam was born. She was born 86 years before the Exodus, which means that they left 314 years too early. Last opinion, 320 years they left too early. 400 years begin from the time that Moses was thrown into the Nile and saved by Pharaoh's daughter, Batia. Amazing. So we see, to come up to tell us that the problem with the tribe of Ephraim is that they left before 400 years was up is extremely problematic, because there are so many ways we can count the 400 years. And there is, as we mentioned, the first way, which goes according to many commentaries, the 400 years did begin from the time of the covenant between God and Abraham. So they were right on time, right on target, right on time when they left. So this is a very, very difficult answer. That's why they were punished. What did they do wrong? Okay, now this problem, when a calculation begins, this is not new. This we see, this is a recycled problem in the annals of Jewish history. I will give some more examples. Number one, we know that when the Jewish people were exiled from the land of Israel after the temple stood for 410 years, the first temple built by King Solomon stood for 410 years. The Jewish people were sent into exile, into Babylon. Today we would call it Iraq. So when they were exiled to Babylonia, to Iraq, today's Iraq, they knew that the time of exile, it was stated clearly by the prophets, it was to be 70 years. Okay? Simple, right? No problem. Oh, big time problems. If we open up our tractate, Megillah, and to the 11th page, side B, it continues to the 12th page, side A. If we look at these two pages, an amazing thing. The Talmud teaches us, explains to us, how the greatest of great could not put their finger and figure out how to do exactly the 70 years. When was the 70 years up? Because the Talmud tells us that the kings of Persia made mistakes. According to their calculations, 7 years were up. The Jewish people were not back in the land of Israel. Therefore, the Torah is not true. And therefore, it was time to celebrate, right? So we have the big party, the 180-day marathon party of Achashverosh. Why is he throwing a party? Why is he wearing the clothing of the high priest? Because it's a celebration that the Jews are not going to return to the land of Israel. They will not build the temple. This was time to celebrate. However, the Talmud tells us that not only was the calculation of the king of Persia, Achashverosh, was that wrong? The calculation of 70 years, he didn't figure it out. He didn't know exactly when to start it. And according to his calculation, he made a mistake. But also the king Belshazzar made a mistake. He did a different calculation than Achashverosh, the king of Achashverosh. He did a different figure. And according to his different figure, he began also to use the vessels of the temple. Now he was free. The Jewish people would be in the garbage pails of the history forever, and that will be the last time we hear of the Jewish people. So his celebration ended with his passing away, because he also he knew that there were 70 years, but the question always is, when does the calculation kick in? When do we start? Even more amazing, the Talmud goes on to say that even Daniel was mistaken with his calculations. Amazing. Daniel, who was a prophet. Amazing. He also made a mistake when it came to this calculation. Now, that's one example of something, a number that is stated black and white, 70 years, but there are many, many opinions there. When does the calculation kick in? When do we begin? Not only that, we're going to take it one step further. We're going to take it one step further. Not only did these two kings and Daniel make a mistake, but in the time of the first redemption of the Jewish people from the land of Egypt, amazingly, Moses made a mistake. Ephraim made a mistake. And Israel, the people of Israel, made a mistake. This was in Egypt. But I don't understand. It was clear as day. There's a verse, Genesis 15:13, says black and white, 400 years. It seems so simple. Yeah, it ain't simple at all. Always the question is, when does the calculation, when does it kick in? Now, what are our sources? That's a pretty big, we just hit the ball out of the stadium over here. It's a big statement to make. Moses, the greatest prophet of all, he made a mistake. The Jewish people made a mistake in Egypt. Ephraim made a mistake in Egypt. So let us give the sources. Moses making a mistake. Number one, believe it or not, we have a heavy hitter here. We have the Arizal. The Arizal writes in his book of Likutim, Sefer HaLikutim, different Torah ideas that he gathered up from the portions of the week. This is in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verse 4. He tells us that Moses was off in his count by 50 years. Folks, you're just sitting there. Get out of your chairs, faint, stand up and roar and dance around the house. An amazing Arizal. Moses was off. According to the calculations of Moses, the Jewish people had 50 years to go. That's why now it all makes sense. Remember, God comes to him in the Sinai desert and he sees the burning bush. Yeah, remember that one? I am sure at least you saw the movie. At least you saw the movie. So he comes to Moses and Moses says, Mi anochi, who am I to lead the Jewish people out? Now, if you take the numerical value of the word me, okay, and who, me, mem yud, it comes out to 50. So the Arizal hits on this word 50, and he says the reason why Moses refused. If someone came up to you and said, I want you to redeem the Jewish people, I want you to save somebody, wouldn't you go out there and save somebody? You wouldn't, no questions asked, right? So what is Moses putting up a fight? What is Moses putting up a fight? Because he sat down before. He opened up all the books. He brought out his calculator. And he starts doing the math and he says, God, I ain't doing it because it's not the proper time. The Jewish people have 50 more years to go in Egypt. So I'm not doing it. Amazing. Second source. This is from the book, the Bnei Shlomo, the Sons of Solomon, page 350. Moses was certain the exile began only after the death of Abraham, which was 75 years after the birth of Yitzchak. Okay? According to, once again, the Bnei Shlomo, he takes a verse that Moses refuses to go and redeem the Jewish people. In this conversation between God and Moses, he says, Lama, Lama ze shlachtani. Why are you sending me? This was after Moses comes and things get worse. Now the Jewish people, they do not receive the bricks in order to build. They have to find and they have to put together the bricks themselves. So things have gotten worse. Moses, the redeemer of the Jewish people, and it's all falling apart. So Moses turns to God and says, Lama. How much is the word lama? Why? Why have you sent me? Look how bad it's getting here for the Jewish people. If you take the numerical value of the word lama, it comes out, of course, to 75. Moses was saying, according to my calculations, we have another 75 years. Why? Because the 400 years that you told Abraham was only to kick in after Abraham's death. And Abraham died 75 years after the birth of Isaac. He died 75 years. So that's when the clock starts. That's when the clock starts. Which means when Isaac was born, that was 30 years after the covenant. And then Abraham dies 75 years later when he passed away. So that's when the 400 years began. So Moses says, I'm getting out of here. And in fact, Moses takes off. He goes back to Midian. He leaves the scene. According to, there's dispute 3 months or 6 months, but he's out. Because it's just not the right time. So this is an amazing thing. We have a very clear words of the Torah tell us 400 years or 70 years in the time of the first exile after the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem during the Babylonian exile. We have clear numbers, and everyone there is throwing up all kinds of possibilities, and they all have credit to them. They all have sources why they felt that this was the time. But this is a very difficult nut to crack. When do we begin the count? Now, also the Jewish people made a mistake. The Jewish people made a mistake. According to our source in the book Shir HaShirim Rabbah, chapter 2, paragraph 8, an amazing thing. Moses comes, it says there, Moses comes to the Jewish people and he says, guys, I got great news. It's time for us to leave. This is the real time now. This is real time. And the Jewish people said, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Abraham was told by God 400 years. We've only been in Egypt 210 years from the time that Jacob came down with his family of 70 to the land of Egypt. We've only been here 210 years. The Jewish people tell Moses, we ain't going anywhere. This is 190 years before the right time, before 400 years. Amazing thing. So the Jewish people, who I'm sure were dying, hate to use that pun, but they were dying to get out of that hellhole called Egypt, and they're enslaved and life is bitter and miserable, and they say, time out, we're not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere because your calculation, Moses, is off. This must not be from God. This must be a mistake of yours. But not only that, let's look at another calculation and understand how difficult this is. Daniel, in his book, the last chapter, chapter 12, verse 13. Daniel has a prophecy, and he comes up with a prophecy, and he says, the exile, the long exile. He looked and he saw the fourth exile, Daniel, in his prophecy. And he says, this long exile, right? The first one in Egypt, it was 400 years. 400 years from when? That's a dispute. In the time of Babylonia, it was 70 years of exile. But now we have the big exile, the last exile, the fourth exile, the monster. He sees like a monster type of creature that represents the fourth exile. That's how gory, that's how frightful and scary this last exile is. And it seems like there is no end to it. There seems like there is no end to it. So he gives a figure. Wow, great! Daniel, let's give it to us. And he comes out and he says, you could look it up in that verse, it's going to take 1,335 years. Folks, this is, this is secret information here, redemption information. Unfortunately, you know how many great commentators, great rabbis, scholars, they have given the Jewish people various opinions according to the words of Daniel that the redemption will take 1,335 years. They made various calculations and they told their flocks and they told the Jewish people that according to, we sat down for weeks, for months, who knows how long they sat down to do the calculations. We have it. Okay, it's going to be in this year, XXXX. And that year came, and that year went, and the Jewish people still have not been redeemed. So what's going on over here? We have the same problem. Daniel is telling the truth. He's telling it like it is. Very clear, the number. The number is 100% truth. 1,335 years. But the difficulty, the secret here, the hidden, the mystery is, when does the clock begin to tick? When do we begin to count the 1,335 years? Now this is very, very difficult because there are so many denominators here. There are so many there are so many factors that have to go in. Are the Jewish people suffering too much? Are the nations of the world exaggerating in their treatment against the Jewish people? What is the merit of the Jewish people? Are we praying for the redemption? Do we really long for it? All these come into play and begin the clock ticking, but we're not sure exactly. This is the tremendous secret. We're not sure exactly when this time clock begins. So, from the time of Egypt, to point the finger at the tribe of Ephraim and said, oh, I got it. Your sin is that you left before the exile was over. You left before the 400 period of time. That is not a very simple statement to make. Very difficult to make. We saw so many contradictions to that accusation. So now we've seen so far that the 400-year calculation is extremely difficult. It could go in many, many ways. 6 different ways. We explained it. And it's not us explaining, it's from our sources, from our sages, from Torah scholars. So, we see that the 400-year is problematic. So then, what was the sin of Ephraim? It seems like they had reliable sources to leave when they did. So, why were they destroyed? What was the problem with them? So here, 4 problems. Number 1, according to Nachmanides, Exodus chapter 3, verse 18, he brings down that there was a tradition from generation to generation, from Abraham down to Isaac, down to Jacob, down to the sons, down to Levi, down to Kahat, down through the ages. And there was a tradition. And the tradition there was a twofold tradition. And it was, number one, from Abraham until Joseph, into Joseph's children, all those generations, till in fact the Nachmanides brings down from Abraham to Moses' father Amram. There was a chain of tradition. What had to happen in order for the Jewish people to be redeemed? There was a tradition, and the tradition said two factors. Number one, there was a secret code to crack the exile, and that secret code was passed down. You know, you go into your car, and in order to start it up, or you go to your computer, you have to have the secret code. So the secret code was two words. It was pakod yifkod, that God will come and redeem you. Those two words in Hebrew, that was a tradition that was passed down for hundreds of years. That was number one. Number two, the second tradition that was passed down from Abraham to Moses' father Amram, that there would be two redeemers. There would be a duo, a twin team of redeemers. There would be two redeemers, just like there are two words, pakod yivkod, I will redeem you. Those two words, there would be two redeemers of the Jewish people. Of course, we understand being Moses and Aaron. So, we see here, very interesting, that there was this tradition, and Ephraim definitely received, the tribe of Ephraim definitely received this information, and still they got up and they left. They left. They did not hear the words of the Redeemer that I will redeem you. They did not see two leaders of the Jewish people that would claim to be the redeemers of the Jewish people. That did not happen. Second problem with the tribe of Ephraim, mistake. This is according to the commentary of one of our sages, Yonatan ben Uziel, on the book of Genesis, chapter 50, verse 25. It says the following, that Joseph, before he passed away, he called in all of his family, his brothers and his children, and he told them, he gave them 3 messages to his family before he passes away. And the messages were the following. This is according to the secrets of the Torah by the great Yonatan, the son of Uziel. Number 1, Joseph tells them that there will be 2 redeemers. Just like we said previously, according to Nachmanides, who brought down this tradition. Number 2, do not leave Egypt before they appear. Number 3, take my bones with you. Oh my God. Folks, this is amazing. Joseph, remember Joseph? What was the sin of the Jewish people? Part of the sin that we ended up in Egypt was the fact that the Jewish people had sold their brother Joseph into slavery. That was part of the reason why we ended up in Egypt. Look in Tractate Sabbath, page 10. Look in the Tosfot over there. So, folks, the brothers sold Joseph down the tubes. They sold him to slavery. They were traitors to their own brothers. They forgot about their own brother, and they did not hear his cries. They ignored the cries of Joseph. Can you understand this? Open up your hearts. This is amazing. This is not Rocky 2. This is Joseph 2. Take 2 here. What's going on? You're the children, the grandchildren, or the great-grandchildren of Joseph. And Joseph, he gathered the Jewish people before he passed away. And he swore. He did an oath with the Jewish people to be passed down to generations. That these were the 3 conditions. 2 redeemers. Do not leave before they appear. Number 3, take my bones. Can you believe this? His own children. This, not brothers. Now this is his own. They leave Joseph's bones back in Egypt and they take off. There we go with the sin of Ephraim. Sin of Ephraim. We said with these 2 sources so far, they did not receive the password, the 2-word password. Number 2, they did not see, they did not notice any 2 redeemers. Number 3, they did not take the bones of Joseph from Egypt when they left. A third opinion, what their sin was. A third opinion is, according to the Marsha, his explanation to the tractate Sanhedrin 92b, and also according to the Mechilta, in the beginning of the portion of Bishalach in the book of Exodus, say an amazing thing. Listen to the words here closely. It says the following. The Marsha writes, how could it be that the children of Ephraim were murdered and killed? How could it be that the reason why was because of the fact that they didn't wait till the proper time? The Marsha says straight out flat, this cannot be the reason why the tribe of Ephraim was wiped out. If it was just the problem of making a mistake, when exactly the time? Look how many people made mistakes. We had 6 possibilities when those 400 years start. We have Moses, 2 opinions. Moses thought 50 years, 75 years. We have the Jewish people. Okay, so because of the fact that we made a mistake, the tribe of Ephraim made a mistake, that means that they must be, according to the laws, the court of heaven, they must be killed off. That is the decree. That is the decision, the court decision of the heavenly courts. He says it can't be. So we have to look for another reason. Why were they killed off? And then he brings an amazing thing. He says, where did they go? There was no problem in the calculation. That was not the problem. As we saw, there's many ways to calculate it. The problem was that they leave Egypt, and they hit the town of Kiryat Gat in southern Israel, where the Philistines then lived and ruled. And they go there, and they ask for a donation of sheep and cattle from the Philistines. Philistines say, it's not ours. We can't give you permission to take our cattle and our sheep. And the tribe of Ephraim, it says, went to war in order to take by force the sheep and cattle from the Philistine people. Now, here's the problem. Problem is that Abraham had an oath with the king of the Philistines. They had an oath that the descendants of Abraham would do no damage, would not be involved in any revolt or any war or any trouble. They would not. They would leave the Philistines to live in peace, and they would not do anything to upset this peaceful covenant that was made between Abraham, a peace covenant that was made between Abraham and the Philistines. And it wasn't just between them, it went on for 3 generations. It went on for 3 generations. And according to most opinion, there were still family members of the Philistines that were alive, and therefore that was the sin. According to the Marsha, this was the sin, that once they annulled the peace treaty between them, between Abraham and the Philistine nation, and they went and by force they took the sheep, this was a violation of that oath, and therefore once you have an oath and you violate it, then that was the punishment. Last but not least, we're going to leave off with this, and next week we're going to get into it. There's a 4th opinion here, the reason why they were punished. Okay, and so far we have number 1, that they did not, there were conditions, there was a tradition, and they, of 2 redeemers and a certain code word, and number 3, they had to take the bones out of Joseph's bones. That they did not accomplish. And the other idea here is by the Mechilta and by the Marsha, that the problem was not the calculation of the 400 years, that they would have been forgiven for. The problem was that there was an oath between Abraham and Avimelech and his descendants and their descendants, and there were still descendants alive, and therefore they were not allowed to obstruct the peace relations between the 2 communities. Last but not least, there is an opinion by the Magen Avraham and the Marzu and Shira Shirim Rabbah, the 2nd chapter, the paragraph 7. There were 3 or 4 oaths that God convened the Jewish people, and He made them swear and take oaths. One of the oaths were that you were not allowed to go up to the land of Israel by force, and also you're not allowed to pressure to leave before the proper time of redemption. You're not allowed to push for redemption. You have to go in a regular manner, not pushing it. Person wants something, and there's different ways to go about that. I can ask nicely, politely. If somebody says no, then I go home. Or I could, grab the guy and say, listen, I want this and I want this, and I call him up 100 times at night. You're not allowed to press the issue. When the redemption comes, the redemption comes. So there were 3 or 4 oaths. These could be found. Number 1, we just said, Shira Shirim, second chapter, paragraph 7. It could also be found in the Talmud of Tractate Ketubot 111, side A. There it says 3 oaths. In the Midrash it says 4 oaths. And of course the tribe of Ephraim, by leaving early, that's pressing the redemption, forcing something that's not here yet, ripe yet, not in existence yet. They push their way. Number 2, of course, they went by force. It says in many sources that they left with weapons, etc., and in order to come to the land of Israel. So there's an opinion by these sources, the Magen Avraham and the Marzu, that this was the sin of the tribe of Ephraim, that they annulled the 3 or 4 oaths that God commanded to the Jewish people and the nations of the world, which means according to the Talmud, there were 2 oaths to the Jewish people and 1 oath to the nations of the world. According to the Midrash in Shira Shirim, the 4 oaths were towards the Jewish people. To be our summary, our quick lesson will continue, God willing, and we'll finish next week. Stay tuned.